Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. War Castles, part 5 of this intriguing story. It's the point number is 14.32. I'm just backtracking a little bit to overlap.
The Vatican itself, when we looked at the Vatican, this place was just the esotericism there, the esoteric symbolism behind this entire warfare platform was all over it. I mean, this thing just reeked of esoteric knowledge. It was just, the symbols were everywhere. Now, when you look down at the Vatican, you see a keyhole and a phallus, and of course the timelines and the shipping lanes coming off there, and the keyholes that lead to those, the doorways that lead from those timelines and shipping lanes from the phallus, from the center of the keyhole there, or the womb, the female womb. And if you look around it, you'll see a bunch of men, statues, just statues of a bunch of guys all around this keyhole. And what they are doing is, this is an orgy. And these guys are waiting, literally, waiting their turn to fuck the world. And I can't emphasize that enough, what that means. They're waiting for their turn to be the next pope so they can be in charge of what they're in charge of. And when we looked at what they were laying claim to being in charge of, when you look at the Vatican, was time. That warfare platform was a location on planet Earth to capture time. And it was demonstrated by the gargoyles that were there holding the sands of time horizontally to stop the sands from flowing up and down, and they therefore had captured time with the Gregorian calendar. Now, with the Gregorian calendar, they tell you what day Monday is, what day Tuesday is, what day Wednesday is. And that is the calendar all the stock markets on planet Earth use to pay out to. All shipping and commerce moves by that calendar. So these guys, we found out, have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. They have nothing to do with God. They literally watch the movement and shipment of all commerce.
That's interesting, because when I went down to the Vatican, virtually 2,000 years ago, what I discovered, it wasn't Simon Peter, it was Simon Magus, who was a sorcerer. And that is who, from my research, I realized was the basis of the Roman Catholic Church.
And they say, or they claim, that they have been given, they have heavenly authorizations to be in command and control of those shipping lanes and those timelines, to watch the shipment and movement of all commerce. So basically all they do is watch the shipment and movement of all monies and all cargo on planet Earth, to include the militaries, because you can't move militaries without money being somewhere first. So these guys know where the wars are going to be, they know where they're going to start, and they know who's behind starting them and finishing them off. That's what we found out in the long run. So when we took a look at how all this worked, it ran back to the 3 international bankruptcies, like I said, and the third and final international bankruptcy came to an end in 1999. And when that happened, the post office that Great Britain had opened up in the enclave of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, had to close down. The king had to vacate the position, and the trustee for the bankruptcy had always been the President of the United States. He was the administrator for the bankruptcy, always has been. Well, with the end of the third and final international bankruptcy, the post office was closed down, and so we no longer needed a trustee because there was no more bankruptcy. But that was the long-range warfare plan of Great Britain, was to use the IMF and the World Bank, because they knew we weren't going to be able to pay back the interest that Abraham Lincoln had incurred by borrowing the money from the IMF in the first place. And with the end of the third and final international bankruptcy, the king would step in, pay the debt to the IMF and the World Bank off, and capture the United States back again as part of Great Britain, and we'd all become peasants and serfs again. But the post office had closed down, and he had to vacate. Well, during that time that he had to vacate, there was 18 days there that post office was vacant. And during that time, Russel-J, Gould, and David Miller had seen this whole thing coming. They had been studying the bankruptcies. These guys were great at it. They understood the courts and the ports, and they understood that the ports, the neutral ports, were
Fantastic.
the courts. And with that, Russell, understanding what was about to take place here, ran up to the Pentagon and asked the Pentagon if they had a copyright and patent on the Title IV flag for the United States, the Title IV flag. And of course the Pentagon told him no one's ever asked us that before, Russ, and he said it doesn't matter anyway because the grammar on the contract was all grammar fraud. I've syntaxed it and disqualified it, and my country's about to be captured, and as an American, I have the right to protect my flag and my nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and this was a domestic takeover. So he captures the flag, takes off to the United Nations, legs in at the United Nations, and when the United Nations said, okay, but all the land on planet Earth is taken up, Russ, what land do you choose? He said, well, we choose the land of the courts during the time of the contract. And of course, with that gave them the highest and most powerful court on planet Earth. He turns around, and during that 18-day vacancy, he legs back in as Postmaster General here for the United States and keeps the continuance of the evidence for the post office open to allow commerce to still be conducted, but under his authority, not under Great Britain's any longer. So he had just seceded Great Britain as the sovereign because he was given sovereignty status by the United Nations that allowed him to authorize the conduction.
What an amazing mind to be able to do this, to be able to understand all this.
Of all commerce and the continuance of that commerce here in the United States. And now we took a big look at that and we were like, holy cow. So the Navy's sitting in foreign ports around the world. The Florida Chads, during the 1999 Florida Chads, the United States ceased to exist for 90 days. It was done. But there was an 18-day period in there where the post office was closed down. There was no longer a president. There was no longer a need for a middleman or a trustee anymore. So the Navy's sitting in foreign ports around the world with no country, and Russ had just taken the flag, and they have no flag. So they're sitting in foreign ports around the world in warships. And I'm sure all the weapons were like, what nation are you guys from? And where's your flag at? And when we went through the presidential paperwork and the congressional record, this is all chronicled in the congressional record and the presidential paperwork that we had ran across for that day, that we had found with what happened was that Bill Clinton was halfway around the world in Kosovo with the National Security Council. At 9 a.m. in the morning, he got a phone call from here in the United States telling him that the Title IV flag had just been captured by Russel-J, Gould, and David Miller. And it was now their new flag. They had just saved the United States from a surrender and takeover of Great Britain, this orchestrated long-range warfare attack that these guys had spent 200 years orchestrating had been stopped in its tracks by these guys. So the Navy immediately signed on with Russ.
But Clinton would have been a British puppet. Ha 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 ha.
2003. And we're like, you're the new sovereign for the country. You got the flag. You saved the United States from surrender and takeover. Outstanding. No one's ever done that. And he legged in with them and leased the flag to the Navy so the Navy could continue to conduct its commerce, its shipment, because the Navy's all shipping. So they were
flying without the gold fringe.
Were able to ship themselves around the world and continue to protect the United States in a defensive posture, or offensively should they need to move to an offensive posture. Russel-J. Gould had quietly become the new, we call him Commander-in-Chief of the North American continent, the United States, and also Canada. And it has to do with postal. So Russell took over as Postmaster General here in the United States, and the Canada Post Office has always been attached to that location. So he took over as the Canada Postmaster General as well, taking command and control of the entire North American continent in the process. So this is when we started hearing a bunch of stuff about how the U.S. Constitution had come to an end. We were hearing the administration up in Washington, D.C. tell us, hey, there is no Constitution. And we couldn't figure that.
The next section will be, is part 5. God bless Katanya Alvin. Bye-bye.